Good evening. Today, we're going behind the scenes of a brand new production of a work that hasn't been seen here at Covent Garden since its world premiere in 1750. That work is Handel's Theodora, a piece that tells the story of a religious martyrdom and in which romantic love becomes entangled in a violent clash between opposing beliefs. It's gritty, human drama, and director Katie Mitchell's brand new production will bring it back to the stage here at the Royal Opera House for the first time in nearly 3 centuries from the 31st of January. I'm Flora Wilson. Welcome to this Insights event supported by Rolex. Later tonight, we'll have members of the creative team to give us a tantalising glimpse of what this new production is going to be like. I'm also going to be speaking to Handel expert Suzanne Aspden, who'll be telling us about how Theodora came into being. I'll be talking to conductor Harry Bicket about Handel's score, and of course, we'll hear some highlights of the music itself. But first, let's meet some members of our cast. I'm delighted to be able to welcome soprano Julia Bullock, countertenor Jakub Józef Orlinsky, and tenor Ed Lyon. Thank you so much for joining us.
I won't.
It's my turn first. Thank you so much for joining us. I can see you're raring to go. You've been in rehearsals all day, I think. In fact, for some time.
Yeah, either raring to go or raring to wind down.
The winding down will come soon enough. Julia, let's start with you. You're playing Theodora herself, our title role. What appeals to you about this character?
Everything. I mean, it's so... I first saw Theodora in the iconic production that Peter Sellers...
The Glyndebourne production from 1996.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's the first time that I saw Dawn Upshaw sing, the first time that I saw Lorraine Hunt Lieberson sing. And actually, we spoke about this the first day of rehearsal, that we were each 17 when we saw this. I watched it on DVD in St. Louis, Missouri. And it really changed my life, and it helped me understand the power of staged classical music. So it is so remarkable to perform this piece now and be making my debut here with this historic work that has meant so much to me personally, and then also, yes, just musically, inspirationally, it's just wonderful.
Is this also your first time singing the role?
It is. It's my first time, in fact, singing Handel publicly, other than in my bedroom, you know?
Oh my goodness!
Surprised?
I did not know.
Worried.
So lovely.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I mean,
how does it sit in your voice?
Comfortably. I mean, one aspect about Theodora, just when Katie and I began conversations, I just started to read about the various Theodoras in history. And Theodora was a saint in the Roman Catholic Church, but there was one other, and there was even one in the Byzantine era during the 6th century. And it's fascinating when I consider the history of those women as well. In some ways, I feel like we are bringing the namesake of Theodora forward into this production, which is grounded, strong, brutal in ways, but also a reflection of our world.
Fantastic, thank you. Jakub, this is your role debut as well, I think, as Didymus. Am I right in thinking that? Fantastic.
Yes.
So he's a complex guy, as far as I can tell.
Yes.
I mean, how did you feel at the prospect of taking him on?
I'm loving this production also because actually I've seen one production of Theodora, which was the legendary production also. Other than that, I've seen only concert versions of it. And to be honest, I love this production because Theodora here in our production has the strength. She's the powerful in the relationship. And I have, of course, those magnificent ideas. But she's really like grabbing the whole kind of dynamic of it and being the actually stronger, I think, one, which I kind of like. It is really different than I expected, because usually when I prepare a role, it is like you read, of course, the background, like you try to find as many like little details historically, but also like to prepare very well your role. to know what's happening, and then you have your sort of image. When you come to the room for the very first time, you have an image in your head what you feel your character is and how you would love to kind of portray it, and then you bump into this whole concept of what it is on stage, like what is the concept of the whole production. And actually, it's not that easy to stage an oratorio. And I love that there is now a trend of actually staging oratorios, because I love choirs. I love choirs so much. I came from the choir background, so I love that in oratorios you have so many choirs, and Royal Opera House choir is phenomenal. I mean, I am blown away, absolutely. So it is great to do something like a work which is not really easy to form on stage, but make it happen, make it super sort of working, and yes, I'm enjoying that.
Amazing. I feel I should drop a footnote in here. Flashcard. Theodora is actually an oratorio rather than an opera. We'll come back to that. Don't leave. Still going to be staged. But yeah, that's fantastic, Jakob. I mean, how different does it feel? You're someone who's done a lot of concert performance as well, I think.
Yes.
How different does it feel to be performing in a costume, on a set, in a staged version of something like this?
First of all, I feel like it is a little bit more difficult to memorize an oratorio rather than the opera. It seems like it's all sort of the same thing, but it's not. It's actually not. Like in majority of the Handel oratorios, the arias are not 6 minutes long, but they're like 10 minutes long. And sometimes it's never similar. It is different, but it is sort of difficult to memorize. And it is challenging in this way, but it is very, very exciting to put on like the oratorio on stage. And actually, I did not expect anything from this production. And when I saw the set, which is another really cool thing about this theater, that like I was not prepared to on the day one have the whole set like one-on-one what's going to be on stage. Like this is so helpful to like practice on actual set, which is not the regular thing everywhere. Not shaming anyone, it's just how it is.
We're going to come back to this to ask more about rehearsals in a minute. I just want to talk briefly to Ed. You're a regular here, it's great to have you back. Now...
That's a nice thought, isn't it?
Your character...
Actually, may I just say,
Please.
I just wanted on the topic we were just speaking about, the thing that I find is really different when you're staging oratorio is, so the recitatives in between the arias. In opera, they're very much people kind of having conversations. It has a really conversational attitude, but when within oratorio, it's often quite kind of reflective. There's a lot of information in quite short periods of time. And I think we found that today working with that recitative at the end where Theodora is asking for Septimius and Valens, to the kind of big baddie, to save Didymus' life, and we literally do it in 2 lines. There isn't a proper conversation. It's just suddenly there we are trying to kind of, and I think that's one of the really big challenges, because it's not designed with this idea of people coming in and out. It's designed with this idea that everybody's there, and there's a kind of more philosophical attitude to it. Anyway, sorry, I didn't want to...
This is fascinating. Certainly don't apologise. Does that mean you're all spending more time working on how your actually physical presence is working on stage, I wonder? Does that mean there's more stasis than you might otherwise expect in opera that you're needing to kind of work around?
Well, I think Katie's main thing is verisimilitude. So she's about, we've got to make this real. And that is our real challenge, because you're dealing with something which is kind of hyper-real, or not even hyper-real. I mean, it's not even kind of conceived in that way, but we're trying to make it something which has that real life narrative.
And proper logic.
And that's a real challenge, but one I think we're all kind of really rising to. It's a really interesting challenge in that respect.
I've got to ask about your character, Septimius. I mean, he seems torn in really interesting ways between his political duty and following his heart. I mean, do you find him, is he a kind of human character? Is he easy for you to sympathise with? You love him?
I absolutely love him. Because there's this he begins his first aria, Descend, kind pity, heavenly guest, shows that there's a vulnerability to this man who's a Roman, he's a Roman guard, and he, through the whole oratorio, he kind of sits in the middle. He's a kind of enlightenment figure in a way, because he's between this kind of quite extreme Christian attitude that you get from the Christians. And one of the issues I have with it as a piece is if you don't have a Christian faith, these people seem quite extreme. They're allowing each other, they're going willingly to their deaths for faith in that way. And then the Romans, who are portrayed as incredibly kind of cruel and heathen and brutal in that way. But Septimius, he all along just seems uncomfortable with both of those situations. And I think he kind of represents an everyman figure, because he's saying, well, can't Theodora just say, please, just sign the thing that says that you're a Christian, or that you're not a Christian, and that you'll go and do the Roman stuff, and then go and do the Christian stuff. I won't tell. Just go and do it. And to Didymus, he's saying, come on, just look. All you've got to do is just do what you're told to do. I don't care if you want to be a Christian. I don't want to care about that. Keep your private life private. But you've got to do the things which we as Romans have to do. And that I find is, we find ourselves as humans in that position so often, where we're kind of, where we have that moral question. So in that respect, I find him incredibly endearing, though in this production, he's a little meaner than... I know, it comes off me in waves, doesn't it? The meanness. But he's quite...
Just the world that... The one thing I've always appreciated in Katie's productions, one, she seeks clarity above everything else. Logic is very important for her, and I guess these are also values of mine. But she creates these immersive world experiences that we all need to just invest ourselves in fully. And it's contained in one aspect. We are simply dealing with the dynamics of this one house, but within that house, there is so much that unfolds. Within all of that, the environment that is dominated by violence and oppressive practices and abusive behavior, where do the human elements come through? Where do we find space for spirituality? Where do we find space for release of anger and sadness, even if they're being, all of the characters are dealing with their own rage, fury, and I think actually really struggling to not only connect with each other, but actually heal. And so it's a very intense, it's hard to have a conversation like right now as we're just about to enter onto the stage, but at the same time, because we've had now already all of these weeks of working within the set, working within the physical world of Theodora, this production, I feel we are quite, it's like we have already done a lot of the embodied work. And I think I'm now finding myself in a place in rehearsal where it's like we have to be very, very serious in our interactions on stage, but then off stage, we're balancing that with being incredibly playful.
And, stupid.
Yes, I mean, we have to find balance there, right?
No.
I wonder that, where are you allowed to tell us? Where are you up to with rehearsals now? I mean, what's been happening today, for instance?
Well, we staged the piece fairly early on, and we had, so the architecture of the staging was
Well, it was
done.
Katie's concern with COVID, wasn't it? What she wanted to be able to do was, I mean, she normally has a very slow working process, but this time, she's like, we just got to get this thing on stage. Because if we can get it on stage, then if we're lucky to have more and more time, we can work that in. So it was quite quick work to begin with, wasn't it? And then as time went on and we realised that, actually, it looks like we're going to have the rehearsal time that we need, we could then kind of, it was almost a bit back to front almost. So we're now finessing stuff, right? And finding depth in character, which perhaps sometimes you might have tried to do it early or whatever.
No, the thing is that I kind of like this system of like sketching the whole show very early and then putting a lot of attention in every single scene and like finding those details, finding your character and like why, what like is happening exactly, but to have this kind of like sketch of the whole show.
Architecture.
So exactly, and it was great to have it, and actually it was a very smart move to do it very quickly on, because we had some stops and goes in our process. So that was very smart, because we were ready. Like we were ready actually within like the whole show already kind of set, but now we are polishing those details.
Unearthing, let's say.
Oh my gosh, that was very
really
explosive.
Excited.
Theodora.
We were unearthing. I think we're unveiling and unearthing things
and
now.
this is a very, very nice process. I love this part of the process. So like it's one scene and we are spending a lot of time on it, like finding all the details, that everything is set, so we are feeling super comfortable and confident about what we are doing and why.
This sounds, I mean, it sounds very collaborative. Is that right? That you're really bringing your own feelings about these characters to play as well?
Yeah, that's why I love new productions, because if you do a revival, not always you have the possibility to give your own input, and everybody, like all of us, are characters. We like to be creative. We like to, at least I think, we are all willing to put some work into it, so it's more like it's more, I don't know, going well with our artistry. So it's good to kind of have this creative process with Katie and offer some things, suggest.
Yeah, I found that she very much pushes you as a performer. You know, so there have been times where I've kind of come up against a wall and thought, actually, no, I don't like that, I'm not going to do that. And she's gone, well, there you are. And then you work through that, and that can be really rewarding, because one does have certain kind of restrictions on what one's willing to where one's willing to go with things. And I think Katie's very keen to kind of go, nah, you can go further, it really works. For us watching, it's really powerful to see you go there, and particularly if you're, working against character types sometimes.
Yes, and also like some things you choose which are comfortable for you. So like you choose the good things that you know that are good for you and comfortable, and she's pushing you to do the uncomfortable ones.
Yeah.
So it's challenging, but if you don't challenge yourself, then you don't move forward. So it's good.
Amazing. I've got to ask you, just to close, do you have favourite bits of this opera that we should listen out for? You know it better than anyone else at this point.
Ooh.
With Darkness Deep.
Oh.
Your aria. I don't know how much we're allowed to give away, but the way that aria is set is deeply, I mean, it's extraordinarily beautiful music with this amazing obbligato through the middle of it. And the way it's set is so difficult, actually, to watch, because it's so extraordinarily moving. That's a really great moment. I don't know how much we're allowed to give away.
I don't think that's overstepping any marks.
Good.
I mean, I was just along with the amazing libretto by
Thomas Morell.
And Handel's amplification of this text, there's nothing superficial. There's some material that you can sort of, in all art and all human expression, there is always material that you can gloss over or you can view as wanting to be escapist. But I feel Handel, Morell, Katie, and also the Harry, everyone involved in this project, it's like we're asking ourselves to be more and more conscious. We're asking ourselves to be intentional, follow through with whatever path you want to lay for yourself, and see us through to the end. I mean, one aspect of this piece that was so striking for me is, like, initially when I was learning it, Theodora from the very start talks about death, and it's almost like she already has an acceptance or a foot or hand in the next world. But in this staging, the themes of liberty and life are really what come into focus, and that is what she's fighting for. I feel that is what everyone is trying. It's like that's where the tension exists, because that means something different to each of the characters.
It's such a treat to hear you all talk about this. You're so articulate, and I can't wait to see what's going to emerge from what's clearly been a really lively rehearsal period. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us this evening. Very best wishes for the rest of your preparations, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, next, to talk about this work's historical context, please welcome Handel expert Suzanne Aston, who is ahead of the curve there. Suzanne, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. First, where was Handel in his career, rather than physically, when he wrote Theodora?
Physically, probably Brook Street. In his career, 1750, Handel turns 65, a milestone, not when he gets his pension, of course, those things don't really exist, but it's still a moment when he's really thinking about what's come before and where he might go to next. It's actually, although he doesn't know it, a moment of change in all kinds of ways. So in terms of his immediate context in 1750, he's running these oratorio seasons now. He's dropped opera. He dropped writing opera. He kind of gradually dropped it through the 1730s into the 1740s. So oratorio is his thing. He runs oratorio seasons of roughly 12 performances in Lent. And so he's writing Theodora to be the new work for the new oratorio season in 1750. And, it's a situation where he's sometimes successful and he's sometimes not. He's not yet the great man that we think of him as. I mean, he's had a lot of success, but he's not universally loved. Although that changes in 1750, but maybe Flora will ask me about that in a minute.
I don't know whether I'm going to ask you the right question for that. We'll have to see. So it was performed right here in 1750. Am I right in thinking this was a nifty bit of getting around the fact that you couldn't have operas performed during Lent?
I mean, you couldn't have them performed in Holy Week. So Covent Garden, when we say right here, Covent Garden wasn't the opera house. Covent Garden Theatre, as it was known, was the place you came to for fantastic pantomime, run by and in fact acted in by the manager John Rich. Now, John Rich had made his fame and fortune in 1728 with the Beggar's Opera, which of course is regularly attributed with pushing Handel and the Italian Opera Company off the boards in 1728. So he might seem to us in some ways a strange bedfellow, but actually John Rich loved opera, absolutely loved it. He just said, please can it be in English rather than in Italian? And so the kind of partnership that he established with Handel actually then in the 1730s and going on into the 40s and then 1750 when Theodora hits the boards, is part of this desire for dramatic work in English. And he doesn't mind if it's opera or oratorio. It's really crucial that it's here, not where the Opera House was. The Opera House was the Haymarket Theatre, which paradoxically, of course, now the Haymarket does Phantom. But at that stage, the Haymarket, where it was situated, was the Italian Opera House. It was close to the court, it was close to all the aristocratic houses, and this was the middle-class theatre, where everybody came, the rich and the not-so-rich. And so when he was writing oratorio, he was writing for that audience, for the cross-section of society.
So without wishing to confuse the issue too much, we've heard several times now that this is in fact an oratorio, not an opera. Obviously this is now the Royal Opera House. We're used to seeing operas here, generally speaking. Is there actually any meaningful difference between those two genres?
In the 18th century, huge, meaningful difference. And actually, I mean, if we're able to, for a moment, put ourselves into 18th century minds, yes, there is a difference for us too. So if any of you have been to see a Handel opera or watched it on screen, you will notice that it's very much recitative, aria, all the way through, with a perfunctory chorus at the end. That's not oratorio, as you know. Yes, you have recitative and aria, but you also have chorus. And that's something that Handel brought in. It was his big innovation in 1732 from his connections with the church, from his connections with the Chapel Royal, St. George's, Windsor. And it was a marketing ploy in some ways at that time. It was giving a popular audience a taste of royal music that they wouldn't otherwise hear. But it was incredibly successful. And the chorus becomes this mainstay of oratorio. Now, to us, great, it's really familiar because we're used to 19th century opera, which has choruses. And by the way, something else that it has in spades, 19th century opera, tragic endings, where the heroine dies, right? Not in 18th century opera. In 18th century opera, you have the lieto fine, the happy ending. Doesn't matter how preposterous it is, you have to have a happy ending. And I mean, I'm sure you can think of, you know, with Mozart operas as well, Don Giovanni's perhaps the only exception to that perfunctory happy ending rule. That's not the case in oratorio, or it's not always the case in oratorio. It's not the case in this oratorio. And so to Handel's audiences, that was a bit, oh, what's this? But to us, we're completely able to go with the flow and we go, oh, yes, Tosca. Or, well, not quite, but, you know, that...
Got to love a dead heroine.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I have to ask, so how did this piece go down in 1750 when it was first performed? Not well. Sadly, and for all kinds of reasons, we don't really know why. It had 3 performances, and they were pretty empty houses. Handel was reputed to have said of other, you know, sort of poor performances to his musicians when they were going, oh, you know, where's the audience? He said, never mind, the acoustic will be much better without an audience. So, but he wasn't happy. Actually, Theodora, from what we can tell, was his favorite work. He, you know, there are lots of comments from after the performances and from decades later, not that he was around decades later, but from decades later saying this was the work he loved the most, and in particular the chorus, he saw the lovely youth. And he loved it for its story, I guess, and also for its wonderful music. But the audiences didn't love it. Maybe for religious reasons. Maybe because it was, as I think was just mentioned, Theodora is a Roman Catholic heroine. That doesn't go down so well, perhaps, in a country that only 5 years earlier has seen off the Jacobite rebellion, one of a series of Jacobite rebellions through the first half of the 18th century. But there's also an air in the sort of impromptu and fervent nature of the worship in Theodora. There's an air of Methodism. And Methodism also was very problematic for the established Anglican Church, which would have been most of the members of the audience, because Methodists didn't go to theatres. Handel himself was reputed to have said later that, well, you know, it didn't succeed because, for 2 reasons, 2 groups wouldn't come to it. The Jews wouldn't come to it because it was a Christian story, and the ladies wouldn't come to it because it was a virtuous one. So slagging off 2 groups at once, actually quite unfairly, although it probably tells us quite a lot about who went to his other oratorios, his Old Testament oratorios. That's fascinating. I mean, so to come to the production that we're talking about tonight, one thing we know about it, one thing we've all been told, is that Katie Mitchell is bringing a feminist angle to this piece. And I wonder, would that have made any sense at all to Handel? Was there such a thing as feminism in the 18th century?
Not by that name. What is feminism in the 18th century? There were certainly people who believed that women should be educated, because that wasn't much of a thing for most women. And some who believed, of course, no one had, or no ordinary members of the public, no men had voting rights. So it wasn't a thing to say, you know, women must also have the vote. But just that belief in equal dignity, in equality before God, I suppose they would have seen it at the time. That is something that is powerfully communicated in this story. But it's also problematic, of course, because the most virtuous woman dies, you know, and that's, of course, the conundrum that then rolls on into the 19th century, not just in opera, but in literature as well. I mean, you know, Dickens' Bleak House, for example. So that sense that even if you're really good, you're still going to get it in the end, you know, that there's sort of no choice for you. That maybe is something that his ladies, the ladies of the audience, weren't so happy with, perhaps.
Do we know anything about Handel's own attitudes to women, or to his working relationships with all those singers that he was writing for?
Well, I mean, of course, there are always colourful stories about composers and singers, about threatening to throw one soprano out the window, and, you know, I think we take all of those with a pinch of salt. Like any opera composer and director, he has to be able to work well with all of his cast. And what we do know is that he quite often took certain singers under his wing and trained them up. That's actually the case with at least two of the singers in the original cast of Theodora. And it was the case with one of the most famous examples is Susanna Sibber, who was an actress, a tragic actress, as well as a singer. And he trained her. She sang He Was Despised. She created He Was Despised and the sort of alto part in Messiah originally. So he worked very well with women when they worked well with him.
Well, I'm afraid we have to leave it there, Suzanne, but thank you so much for talking to us. It's really fascinating to see just how relevant, to use one of those awful words, this piece was at the time. And I hope, as we're going to see later, that Katie Mitchell is making it relevant for us today as well. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to hear from you. Well, I think it's time for some music. So to perform As With Rosy Steps the Morn from Act 1 of Theodora, please welcome mezzo-soprano Catherine Carby and Michael Papadopoulos on the piano. Thank you to Catherine Carby and Michael Papadopoulos. It's a stunningly beautiful aria, that, isn't it? I think it might be one of my favourite in the whole of Handel. Well, next I am delighted to be joined by Harry Bicket, conductor of this production of Theodora. Thank you so much for joining me, Harry. I think we should give him a welcome. Thank you so much for making time, Harry. I know it's full steam ahead with rehearsals at the moment. We've just heard, as with Rosy Steps the Morn. Could you place that for us in the plot for those of us who don't know the piece, perhaps?
Well, Irene is the leader of the Christians and the cheerleader, if you like. She's the one that keeps everybody on the straight and narrow. Just to put it into context, this Theodora, I know Julia was talking about various Theodoras, but this is a real character who really was killed by the Romans. And it was at a time when Christianity was still a sect, and the Christians had to meet in secret. And it was just at the point before when Christianity had started infiltrating the Roman army, and it was seen as a huge threat that if Christianity started muddying the waters of the discipline of the Roman army, that could lead to real trouble. And indeed, only 10 or 20 years later, Christianity became the official Roman religion. And as many times in the darkest moment is before dawn, it's for sure that the hardest crackdown on Christianity happened at exactly this time. So these are people who are strong believers, but are also constantly under threat. And so it becomes clear that Theodora, who's a newly a part of this Christian group, is brought in, and it's clear, the Valens has said that anybody who doesn't agree to celebrate Diocletian, the great god, Roman god, would be killed. And so she's under huge threat, and she's warned, the Christians are warned about this threat. And Irene, is this great moment of vision and peace, says, we are not going to be stirred by this. And it's a moment of such incredible calm and reflection under the worst possible threat of violence.
I mean, I've already come out and said I think it's one of my favourite arias in Handel. I wonder, what is it that makes it so effective musically? How is Handel entrancing me and perhaps others too in the audience?
Well, Handel was a clever man. He knew, Beethoven said of him, if you want to make the biggest gesture with the fewest number of notes, look at Handel. Sometimes I wish Beethoven had followed that advice, actually. However, he didn't. But Handel was really brilliant at this. And what you hear is just like C major, just a third, and then a fourth, and then a third, and then a sixth, and then a fifth. And the C just carries on like this. It's the image of the sun and a horizon. And he does it with the simplest economic, distilled means, so that even if you don't know what those words mean, even if you don't speak English, it speaks to you. And I find that with Handel more and more. And I also know how he worked very, very hard at these simple arias. It wasn't like he wrote the simple aria because it's easier to write a simple aria. It's way more difficult to write something that simple. And you can see from his sketches, constantly crossing out this bar, writing that bar, taking that extra bit of harmony out. We don't need that. Let's keep it as distilled as we possibly can. And I think that's what speaks to us.
It's interesting that you say that. I mean, we've already heard from Suzanne that in 1750 this oratorio was not a success. It was not popular with its audiences. Today it's considered by many to be a masterpiece. What do you think has changed?
Well, I would say that, late Beethoven quartets weren't popular in their day either. The Winter's Tale was discovered very late as a great masterpiece. My own theory about this is that Handel was at the end of his career, end of his life almost, and that he didn't feel he had to prove anything. I mean, yes, he had to sell tickets, and yes, he was a businessman, he was an impresario, but he was more interested in terms of oratorio, of speaking to his audience in English about stuff. I mean, the word oratorio has the same root as oratory. Mm-hmm. And you look at the rise of oratory at this period, running into the American independence, where you can actually start a legal document saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident. The fact that you had to put that in was really interesting to me. And I think Handel was starting to look at these things and say, through these Old Testament stories or any of these biblical stories, we can talk about basic things. So Didymus comes in, the soldier who's a secret Christian, and says, ought we not to leave the freeborn mind of man forever free? For vain is the attempt to force belief with the severest instruments of death. I find that so modern. Mm. Septimius replies and says, descend, kind pity, heavenly guest, descend and fill each human breast with sympathizing woe. These are things that I think we alluded to earlier that are about the way we treat each other. Mm. That at a time when we are so polarized and everyone on the right has gone further to the right and everyone on the left has gone further to the left, and to actually have someone in the middle saying, why can't we just find a way, as he puts it, to sweetly harmonize mankind and bless the world below? There are trumpets in this piece. In one movement, trumpets and drums. In one movement, horns. One movement is marked allegro. The rest of it is deeply, deeply heartfelt, introspective, achingly beautiful music.
I wonder whether we could talk a bit more about the form that Handel was so often working in, this da capo aria, the return at the end to what you've heard at the start. Because, as you say, these emotions, this emotional world feels so familiar to us. The issues seem so modern. But I think something that people who are perhaps new to Handel can sometimes find difficult is the idea that the aria goes back to the start again. Well, how does that work? Because have we just gone back to the beginning? What's the challenge of that for the musicians?
There are a couple of things here. One is that you have to understand that you're listening to something in real time. You're not listening to an opera where, and this is by no means to denigrate some of these pieces, but where Mimi and Rodolfo meet, and 3 minutes later they're singing a love duet. And we go, yeah, it's fine, yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. You did that in a movie or a book or a play, you would be absolutely clobbered, because opera requires a certain suspension of belief, and we love that. I love that for that we can that can be. So one is it's in real time. So the fact that someone says something for 7 minutes, we just have to get, yeah, we can have a thought for 7 minutes. And then the idea of this da capo, the A, B, A. So where you have one sentence, then another sentence, and then the same sentence comes back afterwards. An analogy I use the whole time, so forgive me if you've heard this before, but is that it's very easy for me to say for 5 minutes, I love this person. And then to say for 3 minutes, that person just betrayed me. And then to say, I love this person. And the second time you say, I love this person, same words, same music. The context is in the context of their betrayal. And it suddenly, these same words suddenly have a new flavor. This same music suddenly has a new flavor. And that actually, I think, is quite an interesting way and quite a human way of thinking. I could spend a whole day on one aria, if that's the basis on how we do it. And so I think it's very important that we are able to understand that when people sing arias, it is an internal exploration of an idea. And these are heavy ideas. And I think there's nothing, if you're prepared to go in there, and you're not going to go, oh God, how long does this go on? This is, and the da capo comes back, you go, oh, not a da capo, I can't, you're going to sing the same thing again, I can't bear it. Well, part of our job is to make you not do that. The singer's job, my job, the job of the orchestra, the job of the director. And I don't mean by that we have to constantly reinvent things. Okay, let's bring on the dancing girls for the second bit because people are going to be bored. No, I think sometimes it can mean actually let's get really deep into this. Let's get really intense about the words that now people are familiar with.
And I suppose, to be fair to Handel, since it was me who brought this up, when it comes back, there will be, as Catherine demonstrated for us so beautifully, there will be some ornamentation, perhaps.
There can be. I mean, I personally, in the operas, which was all about display and all about showing off and everything, I think that's perfectly fine. I have to say, for Theodora, I mean, of course we do ornament, as you hear, but I think one of the unusual things about Theodora is that, apart from the character of Valens, every single character in this piece has no ego. This is not about egotistical people. These are about people who are struggling with absolute moral problems. And I think for me, an ornament shouldn't just be about vocal showing off. I mean, it should have a purpose, and there should be a reason for that ornament. And a lot of people wrote to me and said, oh, you're coming, can you write me some ornaments? Can you tell me what you'd want? I said, no, I'm not going to write any ornaments because I need to know what the heat of the scene is, or I need to know the affect of the scene, because otherwise the ornament just becomes like a piece of icing on a cake. It doesn't actually add anything.
Of course. I wonder whether we could talk a little bit about the orchestra. I mean, you're phenomenally experienced with period orchestras, with period bands. That is not, obviously, what the Orchestra of the Royal Opera House is as a standard thing. I wonder, have you been working with them to create something more like a sort of historically informed sound?
I actually see them tomorrow morning for the first time.
How exciting.
Very exciting, yeah. No, but I've done a lot. I mean, I worked 10 years in Munich with that modern orchestra at the Met. I do a lot of Handel with them now. So, I mean, I do a lot with modern orchestras, and I love it because it's a funny thing, although, of course, I've been very much part of the early music scene and movement, if you like, if you call it a movement. I feel sad that I go to modern orchestras. I was doing a Bach suite with the Chicago Symphony a few years back. They said, God, it's so nice to do a Bach suite. We haven't played this in 30 years. And I said, well, why haven't you played it in 30 years? Oh, we're not allowed to anymore. You people have taken that repertoire away from us. I said, that's nonsense. Of course you should be playing this music. So in a way, I'm glad they can play it again. And also, it's a fantastic thing for them to do. While they're doing Nabucco and Peter Grimes coming up, and the same thing with the chorus, that we can have a versatility, but also a different kind of sound world. That actually, it's incredibly cleansing, this music, as I'm sure you can hear, for everybody. But also it's really challenging. This music is a sketch, so where most modern players are used to playing exactly what's written on the page, because in the 19th, 20th century, musical notation became very, very specific. In the 18th century, it's more like reading a jazz score. Even rhythms, you may have heard in the accompaniment of that beautiful aria, in the bass it goes ba-dee-da-dee-ba-bum. That rhythm can't actually be written out. It's actually written out ba-bee-ba-ba-ba-ba. But we play it ba-bee-da-dee-ba-dee. Like a a jazz player would play it, but you can't notate that. So imagine getting people saying, no, don't play exactly what's on the page. Play it like this. It's a very interesting process, and people suddenly feel a freedom to bring something of themselves to it.
And that's all to come tomorrow. I hadn't realised how exciting. Well, look, we're running out of time, but thank you so much for spending the time with us tonight, Harry. Before you go, we're about to hear another extract from Theodora. This time we are going to hear something from our baddie, Valence, Ye Ministers of Justice. I wonder whether you could, again, just put this into the plot for us. What's going on here?
Well, we're now at the very end of the opera. Theodora's been captured. He threatens to kill her, and she said, death would be, I'd be so grateful if you killed me, that would be wonderful. He said, oh, in that case, I won't kill you. I'm going to send you to be a prostitute. And I'm gonna, because that's the worst punishment for a Christian woman would have to suffer as that. Didymus decides to rescue her. He rescues her from the prison cell, they exchange clothes, she escapes. Third act, they both get arrested and are put on trial. And during this trial, both of them claim they want to die. No, me, no, you.
Competitive
both
martyrdom.
of us. Yes, there was a certain competitive martyrdom. And Valence, who by this point has really been so frustrated throughout the whole piece by what he thought was quite a simple, just a hard stick, and these people come into line. These people have done everything that has actually thwarted his plans. He just goes crazy. And it's a very short aria, and interesting in C major again, a bit like the Rosy Steps. And it's very brilliant because it's like, if you listen carefully, you hear these angular jumps, and it's like his brain is just like, the computer isn't working because all the things that he takes as a given, he gives an order, people obey, and they haven't. And you just hear this music just bursting out of him.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's such a vivid image. Lots of things to listen out for then. Thank you for joining us, Harry.
It's a pleasure.
And very best of luck. Now then, please welcome baritone Ross Ramgobin, accompanied again by Michael Papadopoulos on piano to perform Ye Ministers of Justice.
Judges for yourselves, not so our laws are to be trifled with. If both plead guilty, 'tis but equity that both should suffer. Ministers of justice, ye ministers of justice, lead them hence. We cannot bear, we cannot bear such insolence. And as our cause their honor or despise, fall they their supplicants, or sacrifice, fall they their supplicants or sacrifice. And as our cause their honor or despise, fall they their supplicants, or sacrifice, fall they their supplicants, or sacrifice.
Well, now we know that's what it sounds like when a baddie's brain fizzes. Thank you so much, Ross and Michael. Well, next up, we're going to find out some more about this brand new production, which we'll be taking to the stage here from the 31st of January. Now, sadly, the very busy rehearsal schedule has meant that Katie Mitchell herself isn't able to join us tonight. But I'm delighted that to give us a sneak preview of what's in store, we are able to be joined by her long-term associate director, Dan Ayling, her assistant director, Isabel Kettle, and the costume designer, Susie Yulin Valayan. Please welcome them now with me. Hello all, thank you so much for joining us again. I'm aware you're so busy with rehearsals at the moment, but it's great to see you all here. Dan and Isabel first, I've just introduced you with these grand titles, long-term associate director, assistant director. Most of us in the room don't spend much time, alas, in opera rehearsals. Could you tell us what these jobs actually entail? Isabel, perhaps you could kick us off.
Well, I think the real question is what it doesn't entail. There's a lot involved in being an associate and an assistant director, and that's why I love it. We're very, very busy from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. One of the big jobs is actually keeping what we call keeping the book. So that is having a big red bound score with all of the music, and as the show is built, we essentially notate the entire show. So at any moment, if someone doesn't know what's happening or there's a question about what the staging is, what prop is on stage at the right time, we are, as long with the stage management, but we're the go-to people to say, yes, at that moment in this aria, this is what's happening on stage, this is what we need set. And that's a big job that we do. So we really have to essentially know the show off by heart. Would you say that's about right, Dan?
Yeah, you know, you're at any moment you might have to put maybe a cover on for a show, so you've got to know every detail of their plot, not only stand here, move there, pick that up, but also the psychological details. Why am I picking that up? Why am I going to there? What am I doing here? So that, yeah, it's a lot.
And sometimes there are occasional moments when one of the singers is unable to perform, maybe even their understudy is unable to go on, and occasionally the assistant does have to actually go on stage and do the role, which I've never actually done. I think secretly I sort of want to one day.
I've done it once, so I wouldn't do it again.
But I think it's quite terrifying because you think, oh God, do I really know this?
But what's brilliant about it, though, if you do it, is you really understand then what a performer goes through. And I think for some directors who've perhaps never been on stage, it's really a good thing to do because you know what they then have to go through. So when you're asking them to do whatever it might be in the production, you've got a real understanding of what inside it feels like. So I think it's actually quite a good thing to do.
Yeah. Yes.
Only once, though.
Let's hope you don't have to do it for this. So, I know that you're not going to want to give us too many details, or I suspect you're not going to want to give us too many details of this new production, but what can you tell us about what's in store for us?
Wow.
Well,
it's set modern day.
Yeah.
So we're definitely in the here and now. It's set in the original, I think it's in 2 different locations. But in ours, we're setting it in one location, which is the embassy of Valens, the Roman
Which
embassy.
gives it a really nice dynamic because it means then the Christians are having to worship secretly, so that then whenever they are worshipping or sharing their Christianity, they have to do it in a covert way, which adds a real element of danger to the storytelling, I think.
Yeah.
And I already mentioned that one thing we have been told is that this has a feminist angle, this production. How is that actually working then?
Well, I think as I was listening to the previous answers, and obviously Julia alluded to that there's something so appealing about a portrayal of a female character on stage as strong and grounded, but also flawed and having agency. And to me, I think it's why I love Katie's work, but it's also what to me, when people talk about the feminist angle, what I really care about is that makes it more real in my mind, because what we're seeing is a more realistic portrayal of the female characters. And Suzanne mentioned earlier, she was talking about how none of the ladies of the 18th century would have liked the opera because it was virtuous. But actually, I think the ladies of the 18th century would have liked this staging because I think they would have seen the reality, the complexity of Theodora. And I think it's seeing that complexity and also the cost of what happens to the women in that world, and also, of course, in our modern day world, that is so important. So what I feel that I'm watching when I watch this staging is actually a truer reflection of reality, and I think a truer reflection of the complexity in Handel's music in the first place.
Really interesting. Susie, it's your job to clothe these people. At what point did you join the creative team? Where do costumes fit into this jigsaw puzzle of putting a whole opera production together?
Well, I usually join in after the concept has been thought of, when Katie and the set designer have got the concept bit more into place, and then I sort of join in and we start to talk about the clothing and how it can all work within the whole world of the concept of the set and the story.
Okay, so what can you tell us about what these characters are going to end up looking like on stage? I wonder, what can you give us?
Well, as we set in modern time, and if I set it how Handel has set it, it would be Roman time. So I have tried to take some of the Romanness into this modern world that we are creating. And by doing so, I have looked into the Roman guards and taken the colours from there to come into this world, so we can have some feel of the Romanness.
Interesting. So it's kind of bringing a historical flavour into the modern day.
Yeah. And then I guess we're using suiting as their sort of armour, as what they would have used back then. I've taken it what you would have thought what a guard would be now, and that's probably security guard, bodyguard, and using the modern thing for that, which is, yeah, suiting, I guess, in that.
Yeah, really interesting finding equivalents. Susie's just been telling us obviously how costumes fit in. What about the rest of the production? I mean, what is the actual process to bring a brand new production to the stage? Dan, I know you've worked with Katie repeatedly. Could you talk us through how that works for her?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of preparation, certainly. So, I mean, Susie's referred to the concept and things. So I think Katie spends a lot of time getting that concept really clear in her mind, so that the structure within which we all work is then a really strong, solid, thorough structure. So I think a lot of time is spent on that. And because so much time is spent in that process, it means when you come to actually rehearse with the performers in the room, the spaces you're in and the ideas that are contained within that sort of unlock all of the answers in a way. So they help to provide a clear logic for the space. So as some of the cast alluded to, we actually made this piece very quickly. We staged it very quickly because we were worried that we might get shut down because of COVID. So we tried to get it all in the can quite quickly. And that was at times a bumpy process. But it means now we've got all this time, as I think Ed said, to really deepen and refine and drill down into what the piece is actually about.
I mean, has the concept changed? Has the production changed much, I wonder, since rehearsals have actually begun? Is it a thing in motion, or is it very much a case of kind of unveiling it?
I mean, I suppose it is still in motion a bit, but there is a... Because the concept is so strong and the ideas are always so clear, yeah, it doesn't tend to change too much.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite things about the way Katie works is that she'll give the performers the scenario, and as the performers earlier alluded to, they have such a realistic space to work in, and it's the design is amazing. I love walking into rehearsals every day. It's so beautiful, and it's so intricately naturalistic. And what Katie does is she gives the situation to the performers and then lets them run with it. So often they find things, so we're in a kitchen and they find this kitchen knife and this cup of tea, and it's all, it sort of emerges naturally, because obviously we all know what it is to move around a kitchen. So there's just something really nice and organic about that process that I love. And we have had, I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but I think a cake, a rather large cake did appear at some point during, we should have a cake here. And so that was a kind of a couple of weeks in, or maybe a week in, that emerged. So the things do kind of come out.
And also there are some things which you start with which then never appear.
Yes.
So, trays of canapes and things which never made it on stage.
Oh. Yes.
Sadly, probably never will. Champagne makes it on, so that's good.
Yeah, there is lots of champagne.
Susie, I wonder, have you had a chance to see the cast actually wearing your costumes yet? Have we reached that stage in rehearsals?
Not really. We have a few odd pieces that's needed to make some stuff happen. But no, I haven't seen it yet. Probably not until next week.
Next week, wow, that's exciting. I mean, how does that feel? This is presumably a process you've been through repeatedly before. What's it like to go from having, seen your designs, presumably seeing the pieces actually being made, but then to see them on bodies?
no, it's always a bit nervy. I find it quite nervous. The first time you see it on the stage and sort of see the whole concept, you've got the set, you've got the lighting, you've got everyone there and in the whole world, and so you feel a bit nervous thinking, God, is it all going to work and how will it work? But then it's nice to see it come to life from having it on the drawing or on your mood boards or in your head. You know, you got a certain idea in your head, and then it's a really nice thing to see come to life after a while.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, presumably all the costumes have been made here in-house in the department. Is that right?
No, not for this.
Ah, okay.
No, 'cause, as I said, it's a modern piece, so it's a lot of aprons in the show.
Lots of aprons.
Lots of aprons.
Lots of aprons. No, it's mainly bought, the show.
Okay.
We have a few pieces, very nice pieces that's been made here. Yeah, no, it's nice to see them make ones, come to see them properly when they're on. But we've seen the fitting, so you've kind of seen a bit of it already. But
I see.
Nice to see them all together.
And are there ever kind of adjustments that happen at that late stage of next week, say?
It could be some adjustments, absolutely. Maybe some things don't work, or that jacket doesn't work, or those trousers are not working, or the shoes are not. Usually there's not too many major bits, but we shall see.
Well, fingers crossed. Look, I mean, I already put Harry on the spot this evening and some of the others. I've got to ask you, do you have a favourite bit of this piece that we should be listening out for? Isabel's nodding very enthusiastically. Go on, share.
It is the ending of the piece, not because that means the piece is over. This ending is, I mean, the music at the end is absolutely stunning. And the way that Katie has staged it and conceived of it is so, to me, it's so uplifting and so magic and unexpected. And I don't want to give anything away. So maybe I should. I'll stop there. But there's just something, and that is a really important. It feels like as part of my favourite part, sort of the final piece of the conceptual puzzle falling in, and it's somehow really uplifting, even amidst the tragedy of the opera that has occurred.
Okay, mysterious but very tantalising indeed, I have to say. Susie, what about you? Do you have a favourite bit of this?
Well, Ed already mentioned it earlier on, I think, in Darkness Deep.
With Darkness Deep, yeah.
Deep, sorry. It's a very beautiful piece. I really like that. It's a nice, moving piece, I think, yeah.
Yeah, there are so many of them in this oratorio. I think it's really intimate stuff. Dan, what about you?
All of those things, but the end of Act 1, the chorus have a beautiful, beautiful piece to sing, and the last sort of closing moments they sing peace and rest. And there's something, Harry sort of alluded to the simplicity of Handel's music there, and the stillness that he manages to create there, and that we echo in the staging is just incredibly moving and beautiful. So yeah.
Wow, so much to look forward to. Thank you so much for talking to us tonight. This is absolutely, as I say, a tantalising glimpse of what's to come. It sounds like such a powerful and thought-provoking production, so thank you. Well, I'm afraid that is all we've got time for this evening. You can, of course, see Katie Mitchell's brand new production of Handel's Theodora on stage here at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, in all its glory from the 31st of January. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you again to all my contributors to tonight. Thank you to everyone here in the Linbury Theatre at Covent Garden. And of course, thank you to everyone watching at home and for joining us for this Insights event supported by Rolex. Good night.